Welcome YouTube and fellow Star Wars collectors. On this episode of Toys Are the Way, we will be customizing a speeder bike for our Mandalorian figures and Star Wars collection. The recent Mandalorian series has been spectacular and done an amazing job of visually representing the Star Wars universe that we all love. Personally, I've been excited to see the amount of creatures and small vehicles that have been utilized in the show. This has left me and other collectors pleading and waiting for Hasbro to deliver such products in the vintage collection. A speeder bike for my Mando figure to ride has been at the top of my list, so rather than wait, I decided to finally make my own. The swoop bike from the Shadows of the Empire 1996 release is a fairly decent vehicle and closely resembles the speeder used in the show. I had an extra that I was willing to use for this custom, but they are also still very affordable on the secondary market. To begin this project, I removed some of the unnecessary accessories attached to the vehicle. Using a small screwdriver, I loosened and removed the screw located towards the back. Once removed, I put it away for safekeeping, but don't actually plan on putting it back on. Now that the screw is off, we can easily remove the kickstand for painting, and the overly sized laser cannon that we don't need. I'm going to leave the panel on the opposite side in place because I like the detailing on it and how it looks. Next, we will have to remove the applied stickers using an X-Acto blade. Carefully use the X-Acto to lift up the decal and then peel it off. You'll notice the second one I removed was a little difficult and left some scratches. This is totally fine and adds weathering and character. The rest of the decals on both sides of the vehicle lifted and peeled with no problem. Lastly, you'll want to remove the engine sticker located on the back of the speeder. At last, you can see everything's been removed and ready for paint. Before we move on to that step, I wanted to make something to cover up the area where the laser cannon was attached. Using a small piece of felt, I'm going to make a camping bag that I'll attach to the back. I cut a small strip that's about 1 inch wide and 5 inches long. Next, take the felt and roll it up until it's tight and secure. I then used a piece of twine that I had from the hardware store to tie up the camping bag, although you could use any string you may have on hand. I then applied some Mod Podge to help glue my twine together so that it would not come undone later on. If you do not have Mod Podge on hand, any type of glue will probably do the job. Now to begin priming our speeder. I'm using a gray automotive primer by Rust-Oleum since I had leftover from a previous project, but any gray primer will do. Lightly apply the spray paint from a 6-inch distance. This will prevent pooling and reduce drips. Allow the first coat to dry for about 20 minutes and then turn the vehicle over. You'll want to evenly coat the speeder on all sides, ensuring full coverage. Once that has dried, we can move on to weathering. For the best results, allow the spray paint to dry overnight. I placed mine on parchment paper to prevent any sticking. As you can see, the speeder looks significantly better with the gray paint job instead of the bright factory reds. I will admit I was tempted to leave it just like this. For my weathering process, I'm going to use a series of acrylic paints shown here, using the same techniques that can be seen in my floor diorama tutorial video. For reference, these are paints that can be found at any local craft store. From left to right, we have burnt umber, a simple black, chromium oxide green, and burnt sienna. But you could use any paints or weathering kit you desire. To start my mixture, I'll add a nickel's worth of brown with a very small amount of black paint. I'll also add a dash of green paint to allow for a natural weathering appearance. Mix these colors well, and then add some water to create our wash for weathering. Take our wet brush and apply the wash. Then, using a paper towel, smear the wash thoroughly. Apply the wash to other sections of the vehicle, brushing it with a paper towel as you go. Use a generous portion in areas that have a lot of detail and cracks. These spots should look extra dirty with grime. The engine and vents are areas that I concentrated on and only dabbed off lightly. The small areas and corners of the nose should also be heavily covered, then cleaned off using a dry brush. This small brush will allow you to reach these areas effectively. The dry brush is also an important tool to use for weathering. It allows us to further work in the paint, giving it a natural look. Another area I felt should look extra weathered was the bottom of the nose, so I applied heavily, then dry brushed it lightly. Finish applying the wash to any remaining details or small corners that still need coverage. Then use a dry brush to finish it off. Before moving on, I wanted to add some extra dirt and grime to the engine area. Using the non-diluted pile of our paint mixture, apply a dab or two and work them in. Use a paper towel to remove any excess and help blend it together. You could also use the dry brush to help this process move along. Our engine area is now dirtied up and has some nice residue. Next, we are going to address the handlebars. To do this, I will be using a black Posca paint marker. In my opinion, this is the best brand since the paint flows easily and does not glob on. Use the marker to paint on the handlebar grips. This will allow us to quickly paint this small detail. Use the wash to clean any areas where the black may have spilled. Moving on, we're going to apply some paint to the vents and engine components of the speeder. Mix a dash of black paint with our initial wash color. Apply this color to the engine on both sides of the speeder. Once a layer or two has been added, blend with a dry brush. The engine now has some more layers and depth to its appearance. Next, we'll apply the same color to the vents. Lightly dab on the paint until both vents have been carefully covered. Then, using a clean wet brush, gently drag some of the black paint onto the side of the speeder, giving us the appearance of exhaust smoke. Repeat this technique to the vent on the opposite side and bottom as well. You'll also want to add some paint to the engine area located on the back and use our wet brush to add the same detail. Lastly, we'll fill in the engine thruster on the back. I'm using my paint marker to ensure a clean edge and then finishing it off with my brush. The next part of this project is to paint the speeder's attached saddle. Using the two brown paints, I'm going to create a mixture that resembles a nice leather color. I'll then apply the first coat to the seat. This is the one area where the paint can be added a little heavily since that texture will give off a nice leather appearance. Once it's been painted and dried, I'll add some wash to dirty it up. At last, we have reached the final step in the painting process. Using the same brown mixture from our leather seat, add a dash of our initial wash color. Mix those thoroughly to create a nice rust color and add a hint of water. I'll be using a micro paintbrush to apply this mixture. Carefully paint on some rust detail around the bolts, and then use our dry brush to drag the rust downward. After the dry brushing, add a tiny drop of paint back to the bolt area and let it drip. Repeat the same process to the other side. I highly recommend using this small brush when adding these details. Carefully work your way around the speeder, applying the rust color to all the detailed areas of the body, and then dry brushing downward to mimic the appearance of the rust runoff. I really enjoyed this process of adding rust throughout the vehicle. I think it added some great dimension and overall depth to the weathering. This was actually my first attempt at trying something like this, and I'm really happy with the results, especially considering I had never painted a vehicle prior to this. Perhaps it's because we're almost done, but this was my favorite part of the whole project. To finish up, let's add some heavy amount of rust to the bottom of the nose and the handlebars as well, finishing them off with a quick dry brushing. One thing I almost forgot about was to add some rust and dry brushing to the kickstand. At last, the painting is finally complete, and you can see all the wonderful detail throughout. I would recommend allowing some dry time to ensure the paint doesn't scratch easily. Hopefully everything's dried now and we can attach our sleeping bag from earlier. You'll notice I've wrapped a spare piece of twist tie around the twine and shaped a hook at the end of it. This will allow for the bag to hook in place securely on the back of the speeder, requiring no further adhesive. At last, we can reattach the kickstand. And since I never replaced the screw, the stand is now removable whenever we desire. A nice flexible feature to have. Small vehicles and beasts are absolutely essential to world building, which is the essence of the vintage collection and Star Wars collecting. The Heritage Scale has offered some amazing small vehicles in the past. Many collectors and I would love for Hasbro to produce these types of vehicles again. The community has voiced tremendous support for blurgs and speeders from The Mandalorian. Hopefully in time we'll start to see these products. But until then, I'm very pleased with my custom and can't wait to use it in a variety of displays and photos. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video and found this tutorial to be helpful as well. Be sure to let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Thanks again for watching, and please remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.